The biggest value that I received was connecting to our guest speakers. I connected with people that had way more experience than me in the multifamily investing space. But because I had that thought leadership platform, I had a reason to reach out to them. And I now had a chance to connect with them one-on-one.
Most hosts never achieve the results they hoped for. They're falling short on listenership and monetization, meaning their message isn't being heard and their show ends up costing them money. This podcast was created to help you grow your listenership and make money while you're at it. Get ready to take notes. Here's your host, Adam Adams.
Hey, what's up, podcaster? It's your host, Adam Adams, and we are with a buddy of mine, Dallon Schultz. I'm excited. You've probably noticed that a lot of our episodes have people that are entrepreneurs, people that are in real estate. They want goals of usually one of two things. They've got some type of coaching program, or they've got maybe an online program that is virtual videos that people watch, or they are in real estate investing and they want more clients or more passive investors. And Dallon is crushing everything that he's doing. He just does it so well. And he's that type of person that we can all learn a lot from. The way he's doing his podcast is unique and it's well thought out. And I want you to extract this. I want you to be able to take some of the pieces, the way that he looks at this, his mindset, into the way that you're doing your podcast, whether you're about to launch or you've had it for a while. His show is called The Millionaire Mind. It's a journey into a mindset of successful business owners. So he really extracts what is that business owner doing. And going back to something that I mentioned, the way he's doing it is really well thought out. It's like ready, aim, fire versus ready, fire, aim. And I want you to pull some of this out and extract it because I think you can use it to make more money in your business. So without further ado, what's up, Dallon? How are you?
Good, Adam. I'm really looking forward to this. It's been a journey starting this podcast, so I'm excited to talk about it and just share a little bit about my experience, and hopefully it helps somebody else either get started or make some changes that they feel like they need to make.
You know what I'm most sad about, Dallon?
What's that?
I'm like this close to crying. It's because most of the listeners are just listening right now. And they're not like watching you on YouTube or something because you have the most epic mustache in the world. And you've been rocking that for a while. And I just wish that everybody had the chance to see it. So I'll just say, look in the show notes. So if you're listening, just scroll down, grab the show notes. You can actually click on Dallon's bio, his headshot, maybe his social is down there as well. So all of the links that he wants you to be directed to see, go and check it out. And it's pretty epic. I'm actually jealous. I'm actually feeling insecure because it's just too epic. Let's jump into the Millionaire Mind. Let's jump into like how he's thinking about his podcast, what he's doing, any learning lessons, like what he thinks he's doing right, what he's doing wrong. And as we're recording, it's kind of neat because he's in a new-ish stage, if you will. He's recorded several episodes. He's approved of the episodes. But as of today, when I'm recording with him, it's actually not quite launched. It's about to be launched. You'll hear it. It'll be launched. The link will be there. You'll be able to check it out. But you're going to learn some stuff because he's in that stage where it's launching and we can hear what is he going through? What is he worried about? And that way you can kind of solve some of those as well. So Dallon, I've got so many questions and I want to start with, you are working with our team. Correct. And I want to find out, why did you decide to work with a team at all? Because there's so many people out there that I'll say they go first to say, I'm going to, let's say, save money. I'm going to do this on my own. I'm going to try it for a while. But you decided to join a company that really handles all this stuff, but you did it before you launched. And so why did you do that? Is it working for you? Is there any learning lessons that the listener needs to hear?
Yeah, happy to jump into that. And I guess I'll start by giving a little background as to why I even decided to get into podcasting, because I think that's the first question a lot of people have is like, is that something I want to do? Like, podcast is such a buzzword, and it seems like everyone and their dog has a podcast and it's a new cool thing to do. And for the longest time, I was turned off from podcasts. I would listen to them quite a bit, but I had no desire to have my own. This all started a few years back as I was really getting involved in real estate investing. I was reading through Joe Fairless's book, The Best Ever Syndication book. And if you're in the investing space, syndication space, couldn't recommend it enough. But he talked about having a leadership platform. And as I was reading through that in
like
his book,
specifically a thought leadership platform.
Correct. A thought leadership platform to generate leads and set yourself up as an industry leader in that space. And he gave the example of his podcast. And he was doing a daily podcast and he was talking about this. And I just, my mind, like the taste of my mouth, I was like, blah, that sounds exhausting. That sounds boring. I would never want to do that. I prefer in-person experiences. So after reading through that, I said, you know what? I'm going to start a meetup because I like that in-person experience. And this was in Arizona. And we started an apartment investing meetup that we ended up growing to become the largest one in the state. And we were getting 80 to 100 people out on a Tuesday night just to come learn about apartment investing. And I really thrived in that environment. I like that in-person interaction. And we even had Robert Kiyosaki attend one of our meetups last
Wait, did he
January.
attend or did he speak? Like he just came just to see what you were doing or what?
Yeah, he came. One of the attendees knew him and she invited him out and said, hey, I'm going to this real estate seminar thing. Do you want to come? And Robert's like, yeah, I like real estate. Sure, I'll go. So in he walks and we're all like, holy crap, that's Robert Kiyosaki. And everyone's asking me, they're like, how did you get him here? And I had nothing to do with it. I'm just going to full disclosure. I had nothing to do with it, but I sure as hell went up and introduced myself and thanked him for coming and asked if he wouldn't mind speaking to our group for a few minutes. And he said
the same day or in the future?
No, right there. Okay. Right there. Yeah. So we start our events with some networking. So that's when I connected with him. And I said, great, well, I'll welcome everyone and then invite you up. And he said, yeah, I'd be happy to. So he got up on stage for about 10 minutes and spoke to our group. So
was he cussing? Was he cussing to people?
I don't think he did. I know sometimes he gets pretty wild sometimes if you've ever seen him speak in person, but I think he was on good behavior because he was invited there by a friend of his. But either way, it was just awesome to have him there. And that was my claim to fame, that I shared a stage with Robert. He probably doesn't even remember me. I didn't have the epic mustache then, so I don't know, right? But either way, super cool experience. And we were going down this path of starting the meetup, building our brand, helping to educate people in the multifamily investment space, because that's what we wanted to be doing and what we were doing. And it got to a point where we just bit off more than we could chew. We were doing too many things. So we actually decided to pivot away from the meetups and pivot our business a little bit and focus more exclusively on the capital side of the business. And the reason being is because there's two things that are required to get a deal done. You need the deal and you need the capital. And we were trying to do both of it. And we were successfully doing both of it on a smaller scale, but we wanted to accelerate this. And where we saw the biggest need in our industry and in the space that we were working in was the need for capital. And if we wanted to get the cream of the crop deals in these specific markets, why would I go in and try to compete with the operators that were already there and trying to win that deal? Why not partner up with them? They're already getting the good deals. They're all looking for capital. Why don't we just build relationships with capital? And I knew, like, going into this, I am making this pivot, had to have an abundant mindset. Like, I knew that we had access to capital that other people didn't, or we could develop relationships to that capital. So that's what we decided to do, to focus in the capital side of the business. And rather than competing for deals, collaborating and partnering up with people on deals.
So do you still do a meetup at all?
So ironically, I'm not sure when this is actually going to air, but people were upset that we shut it down. And that was probably 7-8 months ago. And because of all the feedback we were getting, we decided to do a pop-up meetup here in a few weeks.
Oh, cool.
And we'll probably start going quarterly with that. And we're anticipating at that
quarterly meetups. But so it'll still be in Arizona.
Correct.
Just every 3 months, you'll just have one meetup.
Correct. And we're anticipating 100 plus people at this one that we're having in a few weeks. So we've just been able to build up that reputation, and people would come and they're like, hey, this isn't a typical meetup. There's something different about it. And so based on the feedback that people were giving us and requesting it, we decided to bring it back. And it's aligned with we restructured it in a way where it's a little bit more in line with our current goals as a business as well. So there's a little bit more synergy between the effort we're putting into the meetup and our goals as a company.
Out of curiosity, like if I'm listening, I'm a podcaster or about to be a podcaster. Perhaps I've been going less than 2 years, or I'm about to launch, and I want to do what you're going to do. How would I think and go around? Like, should I have a meetup and a podcast? Should I have just a meetup? Should I have just a podcast? Like, if you can give like general advice to the listener who's probably an entrepreneur in some way, maybe in real estate, maybe not. Should they do both? Should they do one? What would you say with your experience so far?
That's tough because everybody's situation is different. I think number one, play to your strengths. If you're not a big networker, but you've like talking and you're very knowledgeable and you want to access more people, like a larger quantity, then maybe go towards the podcasting. Where with me, I like more of the personal in-person relationships. Like I don't do super well with a lot of superficial relationships. I connect better with people one-on-one. And so for me, it made more sense to go the meetup route. However, here I am starting a podcast now, right? So
I apologize for interrupting you. I want you to get back to, I want you to get back there. The listener needs to know that Dallon is saying he thinks the in-person thing, the one-on-one thing is the most important. And actually, so he's starting a podcast, and I think you need to hear that that special way that I told you, like in the beginning of this episode, that he's doing his podcast actually is hitting on the one-on-one relationship. And it sounds crazy because you're like, no, he's having a meeting with somebody, but it's going in front of like hundreds or even thousands of people. So just stay tuned, stay with us, because it's really special, I think, how he decided to do this. And I think it's being really effective for him so far. I just wanted to at least let them know that, yes, you are still doing that with your podcast, but keep going.
And I promise this all comes full circle. And that's why I started with this meetup thing. So number one, play to your strengths initially, right? And number two, capacity. Like, do you have the capacity to do both? If you don't, which one do you feel like is going to get you to your goals the quickest and most efficiently? So it really depends on your situation. I knew I'm not a technical savvy guy at all when it comes to video editing, when it comes to softwares, when it comes to things like that. Like that's not me. That's why I do real estate, because it makes sense. I could see it, I could touch it, and it makes sense to me. So that's why I didn't go down the podcasting route, because I didn't want to deal with editing the videos and figure out hosting and putting together artwork and marketing it and doing all this stuff. And when I was starting out, I knew there were companies like yours, Adam, that helped people with this. But as a new entrepreneur and business owner, I didn't have the capital or the resources to invest into it. So for me, I looked at my current situation and said, hey, a meetup I can do fairly inexpensively. It aligns more with my desire to connect with people in person. So that's the route I went. So again, I think it really depends on your listener's situation. If they're already doing a podcast and they want to start a meetup, truthfully, I think people should do both, because I think there's pros and cons to both of them. Learning to speak from a stage in front of a lot of people and having that public speaking ability is priceless. Absolutely priceless. Like being able to influence crowds and people in that way is a skill that everybody in business, whether you're real estate or not, any business should have. And
don't you also think, like, when you are in front of a dozen or more people, we'll call it a dozen, we'll call it 700, we'll call it 7,000. If you can see at least a dozen faces at the same time, though, and how are people reacting? Are they nodding? Are they smiling? Are they confused? That like seems to benefit you all for any type of solo engagement. Kind of helps you hone in your craft as well, just by being in front of so many faces. It's actually hard to do. You gain a lot by doing a podcast, but it's hard to see the reactions of the audience. How do things fall, or is it confusing if you're not in front of those people?
Exactly. And I don't have any evidence to back this up. I don't have any statistics, so take from this what you will. But I firmly believe the in-person connections, when you shake somebody's hand, when you're talking to them face to face, in a 15-minute, 20-minute conversation with that person, you're going to get to know them on a deeper level than if you were to listen to their voice on a podcast for 6 months. Right. So even though my reach was a lot with a podcast, I could get in front of a lot more people. And I think that's a very useful way for a lot of businesses and other people to expand their reach. But for the meetup, it was much more intentional. And I was going more for the quality than the quantity, because that's just what made sense for me at that time. Now, with that being said, I think podcasts, now that I've been learning about them and I have a clear path of how I want to implement the podcast. And I think that's an important thing to distinguish. Like, don't get into podcasting just because you want to get into it. Like, be very intentional. Same with a meetup. Don't start a meetup because you want to start a meetup. Be intentional with it. You got to have that intention. So
Dallon, I'm so sorry I keep cutting you off, brother.
No, go ahead.
So, couple quick things. Just to back up what Dallon's saying, and also to tell you what you're going to get on the very next episode after this. So every other episode is a solo episode, or the opposite is an interview episode. So right now we are interviewing with Dallon. We're getting his experience. We're getting him extracting a lot of this. And some of what he's saying right now is reminding me of how important this thing that I call the 3 pillars of influence. And so on the next episode, I'm just going to specifically go into the 3 pillars of influence on a solo episode, just to kind of back up everything that Dallon's saying when he's not here. I want him to be the star while he's here. But on the very next episode, let's go into the 3 pillars, and I'll brief a couple of them. One of them is your thought leadership platform that he learned from Joe Fairless when he was listening to Joe's podcast, at Joe's events or whatever. He learned kind of like, all right, I need to have this thought leadership platform. That is one of the pillars, literally. Another one is meeting people in person. Dallon and I, we met in person only once that I remember. We may have seen each other at an event in the long past, but we've been friends, we've been connected, we've been in the same industry for a while. And he and his business partner were in my town. And I just said, hey, let's grab lunch. And I honestly think, Dallon, correct me if I'm wrong, that time that we had, yes, some people told you about us. Yes, you already knew about me. You saw my social or whatever. Don't you think like having just breaking bread or sitting down at a table at a restaurant in person helped the trust factor between you and our company Grow Your Show? Like, didn't that support you choosing to work with us?
100%. And that's just anyone in business knows that, right?
Yeah.
Like, because just because somebody has a product or a resource that you know is going to help you doesn't mean you should always do business with them. Like, people want to know who they're doing business. Like, who is Adam as a person? Who is Adam as an individual? And we talked about our families. We talked about some of our past, right? And we had some common ground in some of the things that we discussed. So there's just deeper level of connection and energy that you just can't get from a podcast. You can't get from a phone call, and you can't get from a Zoom call. And so probably spent an hour just grabbing lunch and talking. But at that point, I was already considering moving forward with you and your team, but actually getting to meet you as a person, I'm like, okay, he is in person is kind of how I perceived him to be on social media, right? So it gave me that trust and confidence to move forward.
You picked the third one, by the way, social media, how Adam is in social and how he was in person. And so those are the 3 pillars. That'll be the next episode. We'll go into them and how you can kind of be a little bit better on the 3 pillars, but social media is a big one. So don't be afraid of it. All right, Dallon, let's go into the things that you think you've done wrong with your podcast so far. Like, if you started over, is there anything that you would change? I know it's about to launch, but you've recorded several, you've worked with our company. Like, what would you do differently just from what you know now? Like, because I think that the listener probably has some preconceived notions of things, and you probably did too. And you're at that place where you can really see the differences between them, and you're learning them right now. Is there something that you would have done differently?
So before I answer that question, I want to bridge this gap because we're jumping from Meetup to podcast. People are like, what the hell does a Meetup have to do with a podcast? So let me bridge this gap for 2 minutes, and then I'll answer your question. So I already shared on this interview that our company decided to focus on capital raising and building relationships with people with capital. So I remember specifically, I was outside one evening, just kind of meditating and thinking like, how do we get in front of these people? how do we get in front of this type of capital? And we already knew that we wanted to build relationships with business owners, people that weren't in real estate, but people that had capital. And they were growing their businesses. They were doing very well. They wanted to invest in real estate, but they didn't know how or where to start. So we kind of already had the idea of our avatar and who this person was. As I was sitting there thinking about how do we get in front of these people, I started thinking about the Meetup and the value that I got from the Meetup. And the biggest value that I received was connecting to our guest speakers that I invited to our Meetup. I connected with people that had way more experience than me in the multifamily investing space. But because I had that thought leadership platform, because I had that Meetup, I had a reason to reach out to them and invite them to speak. And when I did that, I now had a chance to connect with them one-on-one before the event, during the event, and following up after the event. And I've created some incredible relationships with people that have really helped me and in a way mentored me along my journey because I had that platform. So as I'm sitting outside my home this one evening, just thinking about how do we get in front of this capital, I was thinking about the Meetup and I realized—
Because you guys raise capital.
Correct.
To buy huge apartments and other types of deals. Okay.
Correct.
All right. So you want to raise more. And so most beneficial thing for you is to be with having these interpersonal relationships with high net worth individuals or companies. And so you're like, how can we keep doing that? How can we do more of that? And so what did you find? So
that's where the thought came to me, like, maybe we do a podcast. It's a lot of work putting together a Meetup and to have a successful one. And you have experience in this space too, Adam. You know, that's one of the things we talked about when we sat down. It's a lot of work. And for us, I didn't want to connect with one person a month at a Meetup, a potential business owner one a month. Like, I knew if we wanted to be successful in this, we'd have to connect with multiple a month. So I said, why not do a podcast? And for our podcast, I wanted to interview our avatar. I wanted to interview these business owners that we were looking for to build relationships with, to invest with us. So I wasn't thinking about really growing our listener base. And I know that's going to happen organically between the content we're putting out and with your team's help in marketing it. But the people we were targeting were not our listeners. It was actually the person that we wanted to interview. And I know most podcasts do maybe one episode a week, or they might do one every other week. I knew that in order to get in front of these people and at the caliber and speed that we wanted to, we were going to have to do more. So we actually decided, this was before you and I even talked, before I even approached you. I said, okay, if I'm going to do a podcast, I'm going to want to do 2 or 3 episodes a week, because that's 15 multimillionaires a month that I'm going to get in front of.
Instead of one.
And yes, it's a podcast, so I'm not sitting there shaking their hand, but you could still build pretty good connections with people on a podcast, especially if the person you're interviewing is the one you're trying to build a relationship with. So I knew I could be a lot more intentional with my questions and getting to know them and asking them about themselves and building that rapport and trust that would not convert them to an investor, but at least at minimum, open that door of opportunity. And that's all I was looking for at the podcast, is to open that, get my foot in the door, just connect with them, get them talking, get to know them, get to know their business, what it is that what they're looking for. Because from that, then I can determine what their needs are to see if it's a good fit with what our company does.
Yeah.
And that's how the experience of growing the Meetup really sparked the idea of starting a podcast, because I saw the value in connecting with the speaker, the guest coming to that event. I'm literally doing the same exact thing with the podcast. It's just
15 times more
in a video format. Right.
Yeah. Awesome stuff. We're going to take a quick break. When we get back, I want to do 3 things. I want to clarify what it is you're doing that's a little bit different than some of the other podcasters that have been on this show, just for the listener so that they can really see it through. And I want to answer that question that you were going to point off for 2 minutes, which was basically, what have you done wrong? What would you do differently? and just end with your best advice for the listener. So we'll be right back. Hey, my friend, as you know, this episode is sponsored by my company, growyourshow.com. We want you to be able to have the best tools at your disposal without costing you a whole arm and a leg. So right now you can get a free list of vetted equipment that like mics, mixers, webcams, sound treatment, editing software, everything that you need. I created the whole PDF with direct purchase links just to save you time and money, to help it be more convenient for you. So this free PDF will help you skip all the guesswork. If it's on there, it's vetted and approved by yours truly. And if it's not on there, it's probably not worth the money. So go ahead and get yours at growyourshow.com/PDF. Let's get back into the show. We're back with Dallon Schultz, and what you've been learning from him is this unique way that he is doing his podcast. A lot of people are like, I really need to have 1,000 listeners, 1,000,000 listeners, 1,000,000,000 listeners, whatever you are thinking. And Dallon's like, the listeners, that's gravy on top of what we already have going on. That's wonderful. But where's the real value is by having those conversations with his speakers that he used to have with his meetups, and now he's able to do 15 times more by having a podcast and inviting that right person, adding value to them and getting to know them, focusing on the questions, because he's literally interviewing his avatar, the person he wants to work with. He's intentionally having conversations with them. And that's a unique way of doing it. On our podcast, the podcast on podcasting, we do a little bit of both. We serve our avatar. We try to add value to the avatar, but then I sneakily interview people like Dallon, maybe that I'm not working with yet, and adding some value to them on the podcast. And maybe 1 out of 6 of them after the interview will be like, hey, let's work together. So I kind of do both. You got to think and navigate when you're doing this. Are you going to have an episode that adds a lot of value, or a whole podcast that adds value to a person? Are you going to interview that person and build those connections with them? Or are you going to kind of do a hybrid where it's a little bit of both? Think about it. That is essential. Now, Dallon, what would you do differently? And then let's get into best advice for a new podcaster.
As far as what I would do differently, I don't know that there's not much I would do differently. I was kind of frustrated with myself, how long it took to get these interviews recorded and getting things going. And a lot of that was because of my capacity. I just had a million things going on, and I felt like I kept kicking the can down the road. I would do 1 interview 1 week, maybe 2 the next week. And
think about that in terms of the listener, because Dallon, I want to acknowledge that you do have a shit ton going on. I have to acknowledge that. That is true. But in everybody's way, Adam has got a lot going on. The listener has got a lot going on. So let's think of it like they feel similar. They may not even have as much, but they feel like they do. I mean, everybody's got either kids or a spouse or a girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever. They've got their health to worry about. They've got their business that they're launching. They've got a podcast, and things hold us back. So if you did it over, how do you think you would record more, or how would you put more emphasis, or is there something you could have done to speed that along?
So I guess if there's one thing I would have done differently or sooner. So about after my 4th episode, I reached out to one of my first guests that I had on that I also knew was plugged in to a very large network of business owners. And so I reached out to him, and he's a good friend. He's local here to Arizona. And I said, hey, I'm looking for more people on our podcast. Can I take you out to lunch and I'll credit you $1 for every lead that you give me? Like, just joking, right? Having a good time. And so, yeah, we went out to lunch and we talked, and he's like, yeah, happy to introduce you to a few people. And I was anticipating getting 3 or 5 names from him. But because of our relationship, the next day I get an email to about 25 people, personal email that he introduced me to 25 other people.
So now you owe him like $25?
Yeah, I mean, his lunch is probably that anyways. But I mean, that was just my way to get my foot in the door and give something of value.
25 people. I love that.
25 people.
I hope that the listener just like says, hey, let me try that.
Yeah. So if there was one thing I would have done sooner, before even recorded my first episode, I would have tried to identify maybe a dozen people that I knew had large networks of our avatar, and reach out to them and try to get these connections made before we started recording. Because that way, when we started recording, we could have knocked them out. And now we're in a good flow. We're in a good flow now. I'm doing 4 or 5 interviews a week now, and we're getting ready to launch. But if I tapped into those types of networks sooner and started asking for referrals sooner, I think that would have helped, because then I wouldn't have been relying solely on my network or trying to do that research and go find that person and then invite them to be on.
I'm thinking about Russell Brunson, who owns ClickFunnels, and he runs some masterminds and teaches and helps and adds a lot of value to a lot of people. One of the things I think he borrowed from somebody else, but I think he talks about like your dream 100. And that sounds like what you're saying. Like, if we want to really focus on the success of this, we can go in starting with, who are the people that have my same listener base that I can add value to, be part of the podcast. They can be part of my launch plan. They can speak, or they can put me in touch with the right people. Who are my dream 100 or even dream 20? I think dream 20 would be very effective as well. And you did that in the beginning. Since the beginning, you started it at some point where you're like intentional, and you got that one guy to give you like 25 people. And you mentioned something else. You said that you're doing 4 to 5 interviews per week right now. And I just think it's important or helpful for the listener to understand, like, how many are you producing? How many are you recording? And why they're different? Why is there some type of discrepancy between how many you record and how many you produce?
Absolutely. So we're going to be producing 3 a week. That's what we've decided to do to get in front of 12 to 15 people a month. We're recording 4 to 5 a week because, one, I still want to go on vacations. And if I'm only recording 3 a week, that means I got to keep recording 3 a week. So I'm doing 4 or 5 so we could build up the bank. We could build up the bank of recordings. And that way your team, Adam, has everything that they need. They have time to do their edits, do their recording, and do their marketing and get it released. So that's why we're recording more, because I want some flexibility. If there's a week I just feel like crap and I don't want to record, I could cancel those interviews and not have to stress about the amount of interviews that we need to release. Now, what your team had counseled us to do was to record a month of interviews before we even launched. So that's what I'm past that point now, and that's why we're getting ready to launch. But just also finding your voice, just getting into the groove, figuring out a good scheduling system. So like I use Monday.com for my project management. I know your team uses Asana. They're like sister companies, like they basically do the same thing. I built out an entire system in Monday.com that my assistant, once I connect with a person and they say, yeah, I'm interested, I mark it down. And from there, she gets them an email, she gets them scheduled, she follows up, she gets bio, she gets a headshot, she does all that stuff. So I don't have to worry about it again until we're interviewing and we're talking face to face on Zoom. And I even just recently had her put together my intros to how I want to welcome and introduce them.
What does that mean? Like, what does she do exactly on putting together an intro? She like writes, she like comes up with what she thinks you might want to say, or
so what? I have my template intro that I like to go over as I welcome people on. But with me doing 3 interviews a week, I don't remember everybody's bios and backstories and experience. So I have my boilerplate like intro, right? But then I've asked her and given her some examples of what have I done to condense their bio into a few sentences so that I can have a powerful introduction to them before we start the show. So I've asked her to do that stuff. So the reason I didn't want to do podcasting initially, and I shared this, is because I didn't want to do all the recording. I didn't want to do all the editing. I didn't want to do everything that went involved. I wanted to have the conversations with people. That's what I like, and that's what energizes me. So that's why I partnered up with your team, Adam, and I shared that with you because I'm leveraging your experience and your team's strengths for stuff that I absolutely don't want to do, nor do I have the time to do. I want to focus on building relationships with the people that have capital, not editing a podcast. But this time around, we had some deals, we had some real estate success that gave us capital to be able to invest in something like this. So I know you probably have some listeners that 100%, whether you have the capital or not, I view it as an investment because I could spend time doing what I'm good at, and that's connecting with people and building that trust, building relationships. So I know there's some of your listeners that probably don't have the capital to do it, so they want to take it all on themselves, which is like, go for it. Like, if you're energized by it and you want to do it, go for it. But I see, and you probably see this all the time too, so many people will launch a podcast and they'll get 5 or 6 episodes in, and then you never hear from them again.
Oh, yeah. That's so common. And not only do I see it, but these are statistics that get published by Buzzsprout and Libsyn and Apple. These companies show how many people, and the stat is usually close to 90%. Like, it's stupid high. It's close to like 1 out of 10 that are going to like keep going, and almost 9 out of 10 that are going to quit before they ever hit 6 or 10 episodes.
And listen, if I was to take all that on, I would have been one of those produce 6 episodes and be like, yeah, no, this is too much. I'm done. Right? Like, I am telling you, that would have been me. And that's why I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to have to worry about it. And that's why I'm grateful for you and your team, is because you're taking that off my plate so that I could focus on the relationships with the people that I'm really trying to connect with.
Yeah. So when we looked at our packages, I've got a crazy expensive package that honestly Dallon could easily afford. I'm just afford the top package. Like, it's no big deal. We chose the middle together because his focus really is those conversations and making sure to put money. He's putting extra money because he would normally have like 2 conversations with that package to now 3. So he added more there and took away from some of the marketing. We're doing some marketing to get in front of more people, but the real value for what he's doing is the conversations with those people. So just extract that. Remember that. Dallon, what's the final thing you want to share, like, with a new podcaster, from podcasts that you've listened to or your own experience here, best advice that you could give?
I mentioned this earlier on, but be intentional. Don't start a podcast just because you want to start a podcast. Like, for me, I'm telling you, when I was outside thinking about how I get in front of these people, it was very clear that it's like, hey, you need to start a podcast. Like, that was the thought. That was something that I just felt, right? Like, it wasn't just a thought, it was a feeling. So I said, okay, how am I going to start this podcast? Right. And so just asking that question. So be intentional and know who it is that you're targeting. And even though I had an idea of who my avatar was, Adam, you gave me like a 4 or 5 page avatar. I didn't know you could ask so many questions about trying to identify who your avatar was. And I remember going through that. Oh yeah, 100%, because there was questions I didn't even consider. And so going through that questionnaire just really helped me dial in, okay, I had the idea of who I was going after, but this is who I'm really going after. It really helped structure even the flow of the show and everything. So it wasn't just getting in front of the right guests. It was, how do we connect with these guests? And so there's a lot of value in that. So be intentional. I'm actually going to give 2. So be intentional and know who your avatar is. And if you're not sure, like, Adam and his team can help out with that.
All right. Be intentional. Know your avatar. In the course that I have, the first 6 episodes of this podcast, the first episode is like, you don't know your avatar. That's the worst thing that you could do. You're starting a podcast without knowing an avatar. How could you do this? I like really play that out. But episode 1 is like, the real beginning is know who you're even dealing with. And Dallon's figured that out. And I think he's saying that this 4-page document helped, and it becomes 5 when you answer the questions, but it's like 4 pages of just different questions that help you understand that person. And you can go to growyourshow.com/avatar, and you can watch the video. You can download the avatar questionnaire. You don't need to hire us for using this. Just go ahead and download it, fill it out, because not only Dallon, but we've had a few clients that are really good in the space of entrepreneurship and helping other people find their avatar. But then they go through this 4-page thing and they always generally say, Adam, that exercise was more involved than any other that I've done. And I'm glad that you did this, because I thought that I knew my person, but going through this 4-page thing really helped me to actually know that person. And Dallon's talking about how after he knows that person, how it actually helps structure more questions, the flow, and be more intentional to get that value. So really, really good stuff. And remember, the next episode, we're just going to go into the 3 pillars of influence, the 3 that you need if you want to really be effective. Dallon's crushing all 3 of them, honestly. And if you do, you're going to have the same success as he does. Dallon, thank you for jumping on the show. I'll see you all on the next episode.
Thanks for having me, Adam.
You know, I really don't say this nearly enough. I don't mention this, and I feel horrible because it's a great resource for you to be able to take your podcast to the next level. And it's simply a free resource that I don't need your email or anything. It's just a podcasting course that I created that is ended up putting in the very first 6 episodes of this podcast. So if you haven't checked it out, definitely going to want to just check out those first 6 episodes, see how they can help you improve your podcast, get in front of more people, and have a better result where you're making more money through the podcast, etc. So much can happen after you listen through episodes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So if you haven't done it, go do it now. And by the way, if you're subscribed, you'll keep hearing more great content. So to those of you who are, I'll see you on the next episode.